Hi, I'm Greg Kokel with Stand to Reason, and in our first session, I want to introduce you to the story of reality. And when we're done, you'll be able to answer the vital question, what is Christianity? You'll know how all stories fit together in a basic worldview pattern, and you'll learn the 5 parts of the basic plot line of our story. And you'll learn who the main character is, you'll learn the basic setting of the story, and you'll also learn the 2 basic competing stories of reality and what's wrong with them. I'd like to tell you a story. It's actually a story that many people are familiar with, but few people understand. It's the story about how things began, how things will end, and everything important that happens in between. It is the story of reality. The problem of telling this story, though, is that it's going to be misunderstood, and I'll tell you why. I travel a bit, and I was sitting once next to a stockbroker on an airplane, and he asked me what I did for a living, and I told him I am a writer and a public speaker and a radio talk show host, and I'm hoping he's going to ask me, well, what is it that you write and speak and talk about? Which he did, but I know I'm at a little bit of a crossroads there, because if I tell them what I want to say, that I write about religious issues and speak on Christianity in particular, I know what he's going to be thinking about that statement. He's not going to think that my views about God and religion are false. He wouldn't say that because that would be intolerant. But he doesn't think they're actually true either, not in a deep sense. That religious views aren't true like gravity is true, okay? Rather, religion is kind of a helpful fantasy that makes you feel good about the world and gives you some ethics and gives you some guidance in life, but you don't take it too seriously, okay? And I realize that for people who think of it that way, it's going to be very difficult for me to communicate my own convictions because those aren't my convictions about the story. And if we aren't careful, if I'm not careful in how I characterize this story, I'm going to fall into that trap. So let me ask you a question. It's a rhetorical question. I don't want you to answer it, but I want you to think about it as if you did have to answer it. What is Christianity? What is Christianity? Now, some people say, well, it's a religion. Okay, good. That's a good start. That's true. It's a way of living your life that's satisfying, fulfilling. Okay, I get that. Some might say it's not a religion, actually, but it's a relationship with God or with Jesus, and I understand what people mean when they say that. But I think though all of those answers are true as far as they go, I don't think they go far enough. I think the correct answer to the question, what is Christianity, is that Christianity is a picture of reality. It's an account or a depiction or a description of the way the world actually is. It's a view of reality. And of course, that's what we mean when we say worldview. But even that word has gotten a little tired to our ears. What I want people to see is that our characterization in the story of reality is that this is the way the world actually is. So in a way, it's kind of like a puzzle piece. It's a picture that's made of pieces, and the pieces have to fit together in a certain way. And if you work puzzles, you know you've got to have all the right pieces in order to get the picture. And if you're missing pieces, you're not going to get the full picture. If you have pieces from other puzzles mixed in, you're not going to get the right picture, okay? And I think the way that most Christians' puzzle looks is a pile of pieces. Maybe they got some right pieces in there, probably do, but they don't know if they're missing important pieces because they've never put their picture puzzle together to see reality as it really is. And this is what I'd like to do in our time together. I want you to see the big picture of Christianity so that you never get lost in the pieces again. Okay, now I've been talking about Christianity as a picture of reality, but here's another way that I've hinted at. You can also talk about it. Christianity is like a story, and that's actually a good way of talking about it nowadays. Every story has certain parts. It has a beginning that tells you who the main players are. It has a conflict, that is, the story starts, and then something goes wrong. And most of the story is about that conflict until you have a resolution of the conflict. That's the third part. And then you have kind of an ending that ties it all together and they all live happily ever after. Now, there's one thing that I want you to understand about this particular story that is different than all other stories, and that is that this story does not start with the words once upon a time, because the story is not meant to be understood as a fairy tale or a fable. When my daughter was very young, she began reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and she asked me, Papa, does that story about the lion and the wardrobe and the witch and Lucy and Edmund and the others, is that a true story? And I said, no, honey, that's not a true story. That's a fiction story, okay? But I was quick to tell her that that's different than the story that her mother and I are teaching her about God. Ours is the story of reality. It's about things that really happened. It's about things that really took place and individuals that really exist and things that will happen in the future. It's fact, not fiction. It's history. And that's really the point I wanted to make with the stockbroker, that he would understand that this is the kind of story that I'm telling. And by the way, when I say that it's a true story, I do not mean that it's true for me. I mean that it's true to reality. Let me explain why understanding the picture, the story, is so important for Christians. Because if you don't understand how it all fits together, you will not be able to deal with the two biggest challenges that Christians face regarding their story. And that is the problem of evil and why Jesus is the only way of salvation. It turns out that when you understand the story, those two issues are connected. One is the answer to the other, okay? And so consequently, the problem of evil is not the problem that people think it is for Christianity. And when you understand the whole story and how it fits together, you will see that. So let me give you the backbone of the story. Let me give you the plot line. Let me give you the events that take place in the story and the order they take place, okay? And I can do that with 5 words. And here are the 5 words: God, man, Jesus, cross, and resurrection. God, man, Jesus, cross, resurrection. So that's the big picture. That's both the plot line and the timeline, okay? And you can see the logical order as a story goes. The story starts with God. He made everything else from nothing else, okay? Then he created human beings to be in friendship with him. And then man got himself in a heap of trouble, didn't he? And so God initiates a rescue plan. And by the way, this is one of the reasons that our story is so different from every other story like this. Because in every other story, man has to rescue himself. Human beings are on their own. In our story, human beings can't do that. They're lost. So God rescues them. And he does that by coming to earth in the person of a human being named Jesus, God, man, Jesus. And the way he lives his life and the way he dies on a cross will determine what happens to everyone in the final resurrection. God, man, Jesus, cross, resurrection. Now, every story has a beginning, and here's how ours begins. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, there's much that we learn about that story right from that one line. Let me point out a few things. First of all, the main character of the story is God. How about that? Not us. Let me say that again. The main character of the story is God, not us. The story is about him. It's not about human beings. He made everything out of nothing, and because he made everything, everything belongs to him, including us. In other words, strictly speaking, we are not our own. We don't own our own bodies. We can't do whatever we want with our bodies if, in fact, we're somewhat like, as C.S. Lewis put it, the tenant and God himself is the landlord. Notice also this. The story has a theme, and it's right there in the first sentence. People have kind of speculated on what the theme of the story might be. I think you can find it right there. In other words, you have a king who creates a domain. So you have a king and his dom, so to speak. You have a kingdom. And I think in that opening sentence, you have the theme of the entire story, God's legitimate authority over everything that is his, which is everything, the kingdom of God. Something else I want you to notice about the story, that the world that God has created includes 2 different kinds of things. Things that are physical, obviously, but also things that are not physical. God is not physical. Human beings are physical in part, but also have a non-physical part. You have angels and all kinds of other things that are not physical. The point I'm making here is that in our story, both kinds of things are at home. Therefore, this is a world in which material things, like birds and babies and asteroids and atoms, and immaterial things, like spirits and souls and minds and miracles, they're all equally at home. Now, this is important to keep in mind because of one of the alternate competing stories. One of those stories says that matter is the only thing that exists, that it's molecules all the way down. That story starts in the beginning, the particles, or as one famous person put it, the cosmos is all there is, or ever was, or ever will be. And in that world, there is no God, there are no souls, there are no miracles, there's no heaven, there's no hell. It's just molecules all the way down. And this is the story that atheists believe and communists believe and humanists believe characteristically and secularists believe. This is their story. Let me tell you the reason why I do not take this story seriously. And I cannot, as I think about it. There's one thing that every single person knows, no matter when that person lived or where that person lived. They know that something is wrong with the world. We all know this. We call it the problem of evil that I referred to earlier. And it's one of the main objections that is raised against God. Okay? Something is wrong with the world. But I want you to think about this for a moment. There can only be a wrong way for the world to be, the way it is now, if there is a right way that it's supposed to be. But there can't be a right way the world is supposed to be unless there's a sposer, to put it simply. There has to be someone who decides the way the world is supposed to be for it not to be that way. But in atheism, what I call matterism, matter is all that exists in motion, materialism, if you will. But on that view, there is no someone saying the way the world is supposed to be. And if there is no way the world's supposed to be, then the world can't be broken or bad. It just is. So in the matteristic or matterism or materialistic atheistic view of the world, there is no way to make sense of the brokenness of the world or the problem of evil. Yet the problem of evil is one of the most obvious things about the world. So therefore, taken as a whole, that story of reality is not adequate, which is why, one of the reasons why I'm not attracted as a thoughtful person to atheism. There's another competing story of reality. Atheism says that only one thing exists, matter. The other competing view is that only one thing exists, and it's mind. And in this case, an individual mind that pervades everything, okay? You might call it mindism as opposed to matterism, or monism is the standard word, because it means that only one thing is real, and that is God. And this is characteristic of Eastern religions, and it's why people say that everything is God. And what they really mean when you look closely at the idea is not that everything actually is God in a meaningful sense, but that everything that we see is not real, and the only thing that is real is God. This is all an illusion called Maya. The only thing that is real is a unified God, monism, all right? And so you have two alternative stories of reality, one that everything is matter and no mind, and the other one that everything is mind and no matter. What's the problem with the second? It's the same as the first. If there are no distinctions that are real, and that all distinctions that appear to be real are merely illusions, Maya, then there cannot be a difference between good and evil. In other words, even in this alternate story of reality, you have no way of making sense of the most salient feature of reality, and that is the problem of evil. And therefore, that alternative can't do the job either. Only the story of reality, the Christian story of reality, that understands the existence of both matter and mind, material and immaterial, and the interaction of both in a very particular way according to the details of the story, can make sense of the way the world actually is. So the story starts with God. He made everything else from nothing else. He's the main character of the story. The story is about his kingdom and his rule. One other thing is that when he made everything, it wasn't broken. It wasn't bad. Everything was just exactly the way his noble mind intended, which is just another way of saying that everything that God made was good. Next is our second character in the story, the most important character after God, and we will pick up the story at that point in our next session.